Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to go through the Rings of Power reviews that are posted, and they're actually not good. Now, when you read these reviews, when you read the headlines, you think they sound pretty good at the beginning, but when you actually look into the reviews, then you start to see the cracks in the armor, the cracks in the wall. Look, not all is well. There's something rotten in the state of Denmark, and I think it smells like Rings of Power. So without further ado, let's get into it. We've got the first article here. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power review. So astounding. It makes House of the Dragon look amateur. Is that so? Well, let's just check in on Rotten Tomatoes and see what kind of scores we got here. House of the Dragon coming in at a solid 84, 85. Critic and review score. A critic and review score, when they match, that's a good sign. That means that there's something here for sure, and everybody agrees. Now let's go check in on what's happening over at the Rings of Power. Wow, 81-37. So keep in mind that this score was about a 96 2 days ago, and as more and more critics give honest reviews, it looks like this number will continue to fall. This number was as high as 45% yesterday, mostly because Rotten Tomatoes keeps deleting reviews. But now, well, it seems like they can't stem the tide, and this continues to fall. I think this number will probably stay here in the 30s, and I think the critic score will actually fall into the 70s without a doubt. So again, this sounds like a stunning review. Oh, hey, this is a great show. Rings of Power, it's fantastic. Only when you actually read the review, there's some troubling things in here. Like, for example, the first 10 minutes of the opening episode set a fantastically busy, robust pace and tone, all happy, happy, happy. It begins calmly and beautifully with a young Galadriel sailing a ship in the undying lands of Valinor, and then it puts its foot down sharply, racing through centuries of history and war, crucially the overthrow of the Dark Lord Morgoth. I'm usually wary of having to read primers before embarking on a new series. It should stand alone. You're right, it should stand alone. But here it is, probably helpful to do a small amount of homework. Wow. Okay, that is not good at all. Nobody needed to know any of this to understand Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson. Nobody even needed to read the books to understand Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson. There was no primer needed. That's a well-done movie. That's a guy who did his job. But here we have, basically, in my opinion, an absolutely horrific critique. I mean, it's a legitimate critique, but it's horrifying that someone is saying, hey, you should probably have to go out and read the books and read the Silmarillion and read the appendices to know what's going on before you can watch the TV show to know what's going on. That is terrible. But it gets better. New York Times, Rings of Power review, shiny, not yet precious. So again, they will talk about how amazing it looks. Look, so grandeur, lavish landscapes, lofty and subterranean palaces, orcs by the bushel, chaotic battles, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, sounds fantastic. All right. Oh, wait. The most expensive TV series in history wears its price tag on its face. What money cannot buy is inspiration. In the growing field of franchise-based TV, it is generally meant to be the opposite. You're buying the rights to give millions of fans another helping of what they've already eaten up. Rings of Power is no different. Wow, okay, so to me, that's a little bit of a concern that says, hey, this basically isn't anything unique or anything better than the Lord of the Rings trilogy that we got from Peter Jackson. The sense of the same but different comes immediately across. Wow, okay. And then we have a powerful elf Galadriel described as a headstrong and deadly warrior with crouching tiger moves. Absolutely absurd, okay? Elves are definitely interesting, and it's interesting to see them in battle, but this crouching tiger, hidden dragon BS, yeah, I've seen what she's talking about, and yeah, I don't like it. It does not look good. And I mean, it's great if you're looking for a Taiwan, Hong Kong style flick, but it's not great in a high fantasy flick. But here's a review. Rings of Power from BBC. The Rings of Power review, a visually staggering but flawed epic. The first episode struggles slightly under the weight of establishing the world and setting up all of its threads, some of which are more interesting than others. The forbidden romance between elf Arondir and human Bronwyn in the Southlands, for example, is quite flat in comparison with Galadriel's compelling mission of revenge. The Harfoots, meanwhile, straddle a thin line between charming and mawkish, although the charm wins out in the end thanks to a scene-stealing performance from Kavanaugh and a joyful appearance from Lenny Henry as a Harfoot elder. This is an interesting quote right here, and I think it kind of, in my opinion, indicts the author a little bit, and I'll explain why. It should also be noted that Henry is one of the many black actors in the cast, a welcome update to the unfortunate racial optics of Jackson's trilogy. So let me get this straight, right? There are few fictional universes that come with greater legacies than the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings and his other novels set in Middle-earth built up a wondrous world filled with sweeping lore and beloved characters, blazing the trail for every fantasy work that came after it. But here we have another author who is saying, oh, but the racial optics around the Lord of the Rings are unfortunate. Well, let me ask you this. Are the racial optics around Celtic history unfortunate? What about Irish history? What about Norman history? How about the history of Europe in general? But why are those racial optics unfortunate? Because there's not many people of color there? Well, that's because there weren't many people of color there. But then that begs the question, what about the racial optics of, say, Africa during the medieval times? How come we don't hear people complaining about how the racial optics of Africa during medieval times were unfortunate? Is it because there were already plenty of black people there, so that's okay then? Well, there weren't any white people. There weren't any Asian people there. That's not very diverse, is it? Doesn't that make it unfortunate? Yeah, and look, the second episode is snappier and more engrossing. That tells me that the first episode is terribly boring, and you're gonna hear that again and again. Time magazine reviewed The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power is filled with beautiful images and tired archetypes. Again, it's the same old story. It's cinematic, it's beautiful, everything looks fantastic. But the show, it basically sucks because the storytelling is terrible. It's slow-paced. Here we have this little blurb in here. Instead of reinventing Tolkien's lore, they reinscribe it in a story that reverently and expensively draws on ones viewers will have heard many times before. The end result could be timeless or tired, but in its earliest episodes, Rings of Power tantalizes without challenging. They also say that the show looks magnificent, interesting, of course, but the show's simultaneous grounding in established lore and repetition of some of the most common Tolkien tropes results in a series that doesn't quite feel tailored to newcomers or existing fans. Even if the show doesn't stray much further from the initial setup, it will be hard to place too much blame on creators whose affection for the source material rings true. That's BS. These guys have been making shit up as they go along. That's pretty obvious. They haven't been staying true to the source material. Now, a lot of these critics are people who have watched Lord of the Rings, but they've never read Tolkien. They've never read anything about the Second Age. They've never read the Silmarillion. They have no idea what is supposed to actually be happening, and so they just say, seems Tolkien. While so much IP-driven storytelling reeks of cynicism, their scripts read as sincere, if slightly too deferential, tribute to Tolkien's work. It's weird how they could be too deferential while not actually maintaining Tolkien's work. It boggles the mind. I'm not sure that work was ever suited to the small screen, though. TV thrives on complicated characters and slow-burning conflicts and shifting allegiances. It has to surprise us on a weekly basis. That's why Thrones worked so well. And Payne and McKay carve out a space for complexity and ambiguity in yet another Middle-earth story where good people of various humanoid species team up to fight shadowy, monstrous avatars of evil. It's probably not impossible, but they haven't done it yet. Okay. So not a ringing endorsement. And then we have this from Polygon, Rings of Power first episodes only skim the surface of the Lord of the Rings. You know, that's not to say Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power doesn't evoke Tolkien. Certainly there are plenty of Tolkien-esque plot beats littered throughout these first 2 episodes. Basically, it feels just like Fellowship of the Ring. It feels just like the movies that we've already seen, so yeah, I'm getting basically callbacks to those, so it feels the same, right? Sinister soul-corrupting MacGuffins, check. Forbidden interspecies love, check. Hobbits, which aren't supposed to exist in the second age or don't do anything of consequence in the second age. Hobbits, swept up in world-changing events, the full significance of which will fly well over their 3'6" high heads. Check. We've seen it all before, and frankly, seen it done better too. I think this all boils down to the showrunners not actually doing a good job. Then we have this from Giant Freaking Robot. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power reviews are in, and they are practically one-sided. I would say they all aren't, I don't know about one-sided, I would say they all seem similar. They seem very formulaic. They all do the same thing. Oh, it's great. It's beautiful to behold. It's cinematic. It's lavish. It looks amazing. Storyline could use a little work, writing could use a little work, dialogue could use a little work, character could use a little work, it's a little bit slow, the pacing is not good, blah, 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 on and on and on. You will see something like that, something similar to that in every single critique. Here we have, with the first 2 episodes ready to drop this Thursday, the critics seem to be mostly saying the same thing. Rings of Power is potentially great, but it's not quite there yet. And then we have this from BBC. The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, dazzling but slow, say critics. Yes, slow. It's exactly what I've been saying. And then this from Entertainment Weekly, which is a very good article, worth your time to read. Lord of the Rings of Power review. Amazon's prequel is kind of a catastrophe. The byline, give this appendix an appendectomy. I like this guy. I like this guy right here. There are ways to do a prequel, and the Lord of the Rings of Power does them all wrong. It takes 6 or 7 things everyone remembers from the famous movie trilogy, adds a water tank, makes nobody fun, teases mysteries that aren't mysteries, and sends the best character on a pointless detour. The latter is Uber Elf Galadriel, Guy Ladriel, who spends the premiere telling people to worry about Sauron, and in response people tell her, don't worry about Sauron. That's 1 hour down, 7 to go this season. Sound like $1 billion yet? Oh, that is brutal. Absolutely brutal. All right, so those are the reviews of Amazon's Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. Look, I think the critics are lying. I think they're trying to make this look amazing when in reality they actually didn't find it all that impressive. And if you look and read every review that seems positive, you will find these little things in there that talk about the story, about the characters, about the pacing, about the dialogue, and about the multiple plot threads, too many plot threads, boring plot threads. All of that is going to be in there. You just got to look for it. I get it. These people, they want to maintain their access, so they don't want to torpedo their relationship with Amazon by calling this thing basically a big piece of crap. But so far, it seems like the audience agrees that this thing is a big piece of crap. And here's my thoughts on Rotten Tomatoes. If they both think it's terrible, it's probably terrible. If they both think it's great, it's probably great. When they disagree, go with the audience. If the audience thinks it's good or bad, it doesn't really matter what the critics say. Generally, the audience tends to be more honest about whether something is entertaining or not. But let me know what you think in the comments below. What do you think of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power? Have you watched it yet? What do you think is going on here? Critics just shilling for Amazon? Or is everything really just absolutely wonderful and the audience just doesn't get it? Let me know your thoughts. In the meantime, if you want to continue to smash the narrative, then smash the like, subscribe, and share buttons, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.